A medieval marketplace thrived on a secret language without a single word spoken. Fortunes changed hands between merchants who shared no common tongue, relying instead on a complex system of silent signals. This video uncovers the hidden codes that powered the global economy long before standardized contracts. You will learn how trust was built and deals were sealed through gestures, objects, and symbols that everyone understood. We will decode the meaning behind a hidden handshake, a broken piece of wood, and a unique painted mark. How did a simple knot hold the same power as a legal document? What kept a merchant honest when no one was there to write down the rules? By the end, you will see the medieval world not as a time of chaos, but as a sophisticated network of unspoken agreements. This story reveals a stunning truth about human cooperation that still echoes in our modern world. What does it truly take to build trust between strangers? A Greek ship is tied to the dock, its sails furled after a long journey from the east. On the crowded wharf, the captain stands face to face with an Arab merchant, the air thick with the scent of salt and exotic spices. A Lombard banker observes them both, a leather purse heavy with silver coins at his belt. These three men need to agree on the price for a shipment of precious pepper, yet they share not a single common word. This was not an unusual scene, it was the standard operating procedure of medieval commerce. In the bustling ports from the Mediterranean to the Baltic, trade was a polyglot affair, a cacophony of languages where a written contract was often useless. How could you draft a legal document when the parties involved could not even read it? The sheer diversity of legal traditions and tongues made traditional methods impractical. This was not a minor inconvenience, it was the fundamental problem that medieval merchants had to solve, and from this pressing necessity, a brilliant invention was born. The immense risks of long-distance trade demanded a system that was faster and more universal than any written language. A ship could be lost to a storm, a caravan to bandits, a partner to deceit. In such a volatile world, trust was the most valuable currency, but it had to be communicated instantly and without ambiguity. The solution was a language built not on words, but on actions and objects, a system of signals that anyone, regardless of origin, could understand. This ecosystem of silent agreements began with the most direct tool available, the human hand itself. The counting house was a world of whispers and wood, a place where the real business often happened not with spoken words but beneath the table. There, in the dim light, two merchants might sit in apparent silence, their hands engaged in a delicate, hidden dance known as la mano morta, the dead hand. This was a secret language of the fingers, a tactile code passed down through generations within powerful merchant families and guilds. A specific squeeze on the index finger might signify an offer of 10 gold coins. A subtle tap against the third knuckle could propose a 5% discount. Each gesture was precise and meaningful, allowing for complex price negotiations to unfold entirely in secret, safe from the ears of competitors or tax collectors. But not all signals were meant to be hidden. In the open air of the marketplace, a public gesture could carry the weight of a legal document. Consider the act of spitting into one's own palm before clasping hands with a business partner. To our modern sensibilities, it seems crude, but in that era, it was a profound ritual. The saliva was not a sign of disgust, it was a symbolic offering, a physical substance given to seal a promise. It invoked a higher power as a witness, making the agreement sacred. Similarly, the simple act of placing a hand upon a religious text, whether a Bible or a Quran, was a universally understood signal. It transcended language, instantly communicating that the speaker's word was bound by faith and honor. These gestures transformed the human body itself into an instrument of contract law. The handshake, the spit, the oath, they created a physical memory of the agreement, a moment witnessed by others that was far more difficult to deny than a forgotten conversation. Yet for all their eloquence, hands could only create a momentary agreement. A ship's voyage could take months, and a caravan's journey even longer. How could a mere handshake, no matter how solemn, guarantee that a promise made in a Genos counting house would be honored in a distant Egyptian port? The signal needed to become something more tangible, something that could travel across sea and desert, carrying its authority with it. It needed to become an object. The handshake was a powerful start, but a promise needs to survive the journey home. Across Europe, a more durable solution was taking shape, one carved from the simplest of materials. An English farmer stands before a Flemish merchant, a pile of fine wool between them. The price is agreed, but the merchant has no coin to hand. Instead of writing a note, he takes a small, flat stick of wood, often hazel, and with a knife, he carves a series of notches along its length. Each notch represents a specific amount, a certain quality of wool. Then, in a dramatic gesture, he splits the stick right down the middle through the notches. One half, called the stock, stays with the merchant. The other half, the foil, is handed to the farmer. This was a tally stick, a physical contract that anyone could understand. The farmer now held undeniable proof of the debt. Months later, when he returned for payment, the two pieces would be brought together. The merchant would take his stock and press it against the farmer's foil. If the grain of the wood matched perfectly and the notches aligned like a key in a lock, the debt was instantly verified. This system was so trusted, so foolproof, that the English exchequer used it for centuries to record taxes and royal debts, creating a vast, silent archive of notched wood. But wood was not the only material for memory. In the great markets of Constantinople and the trading quarters of London, merchants used small tokens made of lead or pewter. These tokens, stamped with a unique merchant's mark, acted as IOUs or proofs of purchase. They were durable, difficult to counterfeit, and their meaning was clear without a single letter of text. A token in your pocket was as good as a signed receipt. These objects made debt tangible. They turned an abstract promise into something you could hold in your hand, a physical weight that reminded you of an obligation. A broken tally stick was a silent witness, a permanent record of a deal struck. Yet, while these objects secured individual transactions, a merchant's reputation was his most valuable asset, a silent signal that traveled even further than a tally stick. A barrel of wine, a bale of English wool, a crate of German iron tools, each arrived at the distant dock with a story told not in words, but in a single, bold symbol painted on its side. Walk through the bustling port of Hamburg or the crowded Rialto market in Venice, and you would see a gallery of silent signatures, a stylized bird, a simple key, a three-towered castle. These were the merchant marks, the personal brands that turned anonymous cargo into a known quantity. In a world where many merchants could not write their own names, these symbols became their signature, a universal language of identity and accountability. The mark's primary purpose was brilliantly simple: to answer the most critical question in long-distance trade: who stands behind these goods? When a merchant consigned his cloth to a ship's captain, he was placing immense trust in a virtual stranger. A painted mark on the bale was his guarantee. If the cloth arrived in Alexandria waterlogged or of inferior quality, the Egyptian buyer did not blame the ship's captain. He looked for the mark. That symbol pointed directly back to the merchant in Flanders who had shipped it. His reputation, his entire ability to do business in the future, was now tied to that painted bird or key. A good mark, one associated with consistent quality and honest dealing, became a magnet for business. It was a silent advertisement that traveled across continents. Conversely, a mark associated with poor goods or deceit was a death sentence. News of a tarnished mark spread through the guilds and trading posts, ensuring that no one would accept goods bearing that symbol again. This visual directory of trust created a powerful incentive for honesty, but the system's genius lay in its simplicity. These marks were designed to be easily copied, remembered, and recognized. They were often derived from the symbols on a family's coat of arms, or from the tools of a particular trade, like a shoemaker's awl or a baker's peel. This made them personal and difficult to forge convincingly. A merchant would use his mark on everything, from sealing wax on documents to the tools in his workshop, creating a consistent brand identity centuries before the concept had a name. The mark was more than a signature, it was a silent vow, a promise that the individual stood behind the community of trade, and that community, in turn, developed its own powerful systems to protect this fragile web of trust. A merchant's mark was a powerful promise, but it drew its strength from a larger authority. Within the stone walls of a Florentine wool guild hall, these individual signals were forged into an unbreakable system. Guilds were the invisible architecture of trust, the institutional supercomputers that processed reputations and standardized the very language of commerce. They took the personal mark and gave it collective power. A customer in a foreign market did not need to know the individual reputation of every cloth merchant from Bruges. They only needed to see the guild seal stamped on a bale of wool. That single symbol was a silent signal, instantly communicating that the goods had been measured with approved weights, woven to a specific grade, and were backed by the entire financial and ethical weight of the guild. This collective guarantee was ruthlessly enforced. A member caught using shoddy materials or cheating on measures faced fines so heavy they could ruin him. For the most serious offenses, the penalty was expulsion, a commercial death sentence that meant no one in the trade would deal with him again. The guild hall itself, often the grandest building in a commercial district, stood as a permanent, silent signal of order and authority amidst the market's chaos. It was a physical reminder that behind every handshake, every tally stick, and every merchant's mark, there was an institution ready to defend the integrity of the system. This framework gave the silent signals their teeth, making them more than just custom, they became law. But what about the countless people who were not guild members, the everyday shoppers in a local market? For trade to flow at every level, from the grand international fair to the village square, the signals needed to be understood by everyone instantly. This necessity gave rise to a set of universal symbols that transcended even the power of the guilds. Beyond the guild halls, in the sprawling chaos of the great annual fairs, the silent signals had to work on a truly monumental scale. The Champagne fairs in France were a temporary city of commerce, a whirlwind of 10,000 strangers from every corner of the known world. A German merchant, fresh from the Rhineland, did not need to speak a word of French or Italian to navigate this bustling metropolis. The entire fair was a carefully orchestrated symphony of understood signs. To find the best Italian silk, he simply looked for the banners flying above the tents, each one bearing the distinctive arms of a city like Florence or Lucca, a universally recognized advertisement of origin and quality. A wooden sword hanging above a doorway was an unmistakable sign of a fencing master, while a striped pole marked the establishment of a barber surgeon, ready to offer a shave or a risky medical procedure. Even the humble tavern announced itself not with a written sign, but with a fresh green bush or a wreath hung over its entrance, a symbol of hospitality and drink that required no translation. The layout of the fair itself was a silent signal system, meticulously planned to create order from potential chaos. The fishmongers were always clustered near the water gate for obvious practical reasons, their area identifiable by the scent of the sea and the barrels of salted herring. The leatherworkers occupied a specific street, marked by the pungent smell of tanning vats and the sight of stretched hides. This predictable organization meant that a merchant searching for Flemish wool or Spanish iron knew exactly where to go, guided by an unspoken, universally understood map. These symbols created a predictable, orderly environment where business could be conducted with breathtaking efficiency across seemingly insurmountable language barriers. But the true genius of this system extended even further into the very tools used to measure value and ensure fairness. The final and most fundamental layer of this silent language was not a gesture or a symbol, but a precise physical weight. Picture the spice merchant carefully pouring strands of saffron onto the polished bronze pan of his scale. The counterweight he selects is not a random rock. It is an official, bell-shaped piece of bronze, its surface stamped with the unmistakable seal of the city. That small, embossed mark is a silent scream of legitimacy. In a world without international standards, the entire concept of fair trade hinged on this local authority. A length of cloth was measured by the ell, a specific distance from the merchant's elbow to his fingertip, a measure that was itself standardized and verified by the guild. Grain was sold by the bushel, a container whose exact volume was certified by the town council. Wool was traded by the stone, a specific weight that could mean the difference between profit and loss. The very act of using these official measures was a non-verbal contract. When a merchant brought out his personal set of sealed weights, he was silently declaring, "I play by the rules." The public weighing of goods became a small ceremony, a performance of fairness witnessed by all. The buyer watched intently as the scales' beams slowly leveled, a visual confirmation that the deal was just. Any attempt to cheat was treated with severe public punishment. A merchant caught using false weights might have his heavy lead weights hung around his neck as he was paraded through the marketplace, a living, breathing warning to others. This consistent, reliable system of measurement was a universal language of honesty that required no translation. It ensured that a pound of pepper in Venice meant the same as a pound of pepper in Cairo, creating a bedrock of trust upon which empires of commerce were built. And just as space and weight were measured with silent precision, so too was the most valuable commodity of all, time itself. The rhythmic tolling of the church bell was the heartbeat of the city's economy. Its deep, resonant peal did not simply mark the hour, it commanded action. One ring at dawn signaled that the market stalls could be set up, that the gates were open for business. Another, more urgent sequence in the late afternoon was a final warning, the last call for purchases before the square had to be cleared. This sound created a shared schedule for thousands of people, from the wealthiest guild master to the poorest day laborer. No one needed a personal clock or a shouted announcement. The bell's authority was absolute and universally understood. It structured the very time of commerce, ensuring that all trade happened within a sanctioned, orderly framework. Just as the bell governed the day, another sound heralded new opportunity. The distant, clear blast of a watchman's horn from the city walls announced the approach of a merchant caravan. This was not a noise of alarm, but one of excitement. It triggered a flurry of prepared activity. Tax officials would move to the gates to assess tolls. Scribes readied their tally sticks. Buyers hurried to the main square, hoping to be the first to see exotic goods from afar. The horn cut through the city's constant din, a precise auditory signal that cut across language, telling everyone that wealth was literally at the door. Even the human voice itself was used as a regulated instrument of commerce. The town crier, standing on the steps of the Guildhall, did more than just speak words. His very presence, his official robes, and the formal cadence of his speech were a signal. The crowd understood that the content of his message would be about official prices for grain, a new tax on imported wine, or a proclamation from the local lord. The tone conveyed the message's gravity before any single word was comprehended. Similarly, the auctioneer's rapid, almost musical chant was a form of controlled chaos. This rhythmic patter was designed to create excitement and urgency, pushing bids higher and faster in a universal language of rising numbers and heightened emotion. These sounds provided the temporal architecture for trade, a shared schedule that allowed strangers to coordinate their activities with perfect precision. But if sound organized time, then the arrangement of space and the silent statements of personal appearance organized society itself. Your appearance was your financial resume, read by everyone in the marketplace long before a single coin changed hands. A Florentine banker did not need to state his profession. He wore it in the deep, expensive black of his finely woven wool gown, a garment cut with such precision it screamed of wealth and connections. The white fur lining his sleeves was not merely for warmth. It was a carefully calibrated signal of his social rank, its width and type strictly dictated by the city's sumptuary laws. These laws turned fashion into a public ledger, ensuring that a man's clothing accurately reflected his place in the commercial hierarchy. A merchant arriving from the Levant, wrapped in a silk turban and flowing robes, communicated a wealth of information the moment he stepped off the ship. His attire was an unspoken advertisement, instantly telling potential partners that he dealt in the luxuries of the East, in pepper, saffron, and precious stones. This visual shorthand enabled rapid, initial sorting in the chaotic throng of a trading fair. But clothing was only the first page of this non-verbal curriculum vitae. A merchant's entire demeanor was under constant scrutiny. A calm, steady gaze and a confident posture suggested a man of substance, someone whose promises could be trusted. Fidgeting hands, a failure to maintain eye contact, or a generally disheveled appearance, however, were red flags. They whispered of desperation or deceit, making other merchants instinctively tighten their purse strings. Even a merchant's horse and the size of his retinue spoke volumes. A well-groomed palfrey and a few soberly dressed servants signaled stability and success. A large, flashy entourage might suggest wealth, but it could also hint at dangerous extravagance. In an era without formal credit scores or digital profiles, this entire package of personal presentation was your primary financial statement. It was the foundation upon which the most critical silent agreement was built, the extension of credit, a promise of future payment that was the true lifeblood of long-distance trade. The most valuable asset a merchant possessed was completely invisible, a currency built on whispers and remembered promises. In the counting houses of Bruges or Venice, a merchant might need to purchase a vast shipment of English wool, but have only a fraction of the required silver coins in his strongbox. His solution was not a bank loan in the modern sense, but a quiet conversation with a fellow merchant from a trusted network. A handshake would seal the agreement for goods to be delivered now, with payment to follow months later. No written contract was exchanged, no formal IOU was signed. This entire system, known as merchant credit or the law merchant, operated on a single, powerful principle: a man's word was his bond. Your reputation was your financial identity, a living document that traveled ahead of you on every ship and caravan. A default on a debt was not a private matter, it was a commercial catastrophe. News of a broken promise would spread with astonishing speed through letters carried by trusted couriers and stories told in every portside tavern. The offender would find himself effectively blacklisted, a pariah whom no one would trust with so much as a single bolt of cloth. This invisible web of trust, stretching from London to Alexandria, enforced honesty more ruthlessly than any royal court could. The most powerful silent signal in this world was not a gesture you made, but a privilege you were granted, the willingness of others to extend credit to you. If you were trusted, you could build an empire with very little hard currency. If your reputation was tarnished, your business was finished. This relentless pressure to maintain a good name created a self-policing community of commerce. But this vast, invisible network needed physical anchors, places where a reputation could be verified, where trust was face-to-face. These were the trading posts, the nerve centers where the silent signals of the global economy were decoded. The walls of a Hanseatic contour spoke a language of pure power. In foreign ports like London or Bruges, these fortified trading posts were islands of German law and custom, their high stone walls a silent but unmistakable declaration of authority to the local king and every other merchant. Inside the steelyard in London, the air was thick with the scent of wax and timber. The layout was a meticulously planned script for commerce. Warehouses for storing wool and cloth stood next to a chapel, signaling that business and faith were intertwined. A central weighing house ensured that every transaction used Hanseatic measures, a silent guarantee of consistency. For a merchant from Cologne arriving after a treacherous North Sea voyage, passing through the Contour's gate was like stepping into a familiar world. He did not need to ask about the rules. The very architecture told him that disputes would be settled by a council of his peers, that his goods were safe, and that the complex signals of trade would be understood by everyone inside. This was a bubble of predictable order in a chaotic world. Far to the east, along the dusty stretches of the Silk Road, another form of architectural signal offered sanctuary. The caravanserai was a fortress for commerce, a square of high walls rising from the empty desert. Its single, heavy gate, shut tight at night, was the most important signal it sent, a promise of safety from bandits and the elements. But its design communicated much more. The rooms for merchants and their servants all faced into a vast central courtyard. This inward focus was a deliberate message of community and mutual surveillance. Trust was enforced by proximity. As a caravan master led his tired camels through the gate, his experienced eyes scanned the courtyard. The arrangement of bales, the types of goods being unpacked, even the breeds of horses resting in the stables, all gave him an instant, wordless report on who was here and what opportunities might exist. A pile of Persian rugs suggested a wealthy merchant from the south. The distinctive smell of drying leather indicated a tanner from the north. The caravanserai was not just a shelter, it was a bustling information exchange built from clay and stone. Within these protected spaces, the final act of a deal was often sealed with a shared meal, a ritual that transformed potential rivals into partners. Breaking bread together created a temporary bond of hospitality, making a handshake or a promise feel more sacred. The architecture set the stage, but the final, silent signal was one of shared humanity. The clinking of cups was the period at the end of a silent sentence, a final, sensory stamp on a business agreement. After the intense negotiation of hands and the exchange of tally sticks, the shared meal or drink was the crucial final act. It was a ceremony that moved the deal from the realm of commerce into the sacred space of human relationship. In a dimly lit tavern near the docks, a Genos trader and an Egyptian merchant would not simply shake hands and part ways. They would sit down together, sharing a loaf of bread and a flask of wine. This was not a casual celebration. It was a ritual as formal as any notary's signature. By breaking bread from the same loaf, they were symbolically acknowledging their interdependence. Drinking from the same cup created a powerful, temporary bond of kinship, a fiction of family that made violating the agreement feel like a profound personal betrayal, an offense against the laws of hospitality that transcended mere business. The act engaged taste and touch, etching the memory of the agreement into the body itself, making it far more visceral and binding than any words on parchment could ever be. In some Northern European traditions, the ritual was even more tangible. A silver coin might be deliberately broken in two, with each party keeping a half. This was more than a souvenir, it was a physical key. When the two halves were eventually rejoined, they would prove the partnership was genuine and the original terms were to be honored. These ceremonies provided an unmistakable start and end point to negotiations, a clear line in the sand that left no room for ambiguity about whether a deal was truly final. But what happened when this powerful, unspoken code was violated? What enforced these silent agreements when a handshake was forgotten, a tally stick lost, or a shared cup of wine betrayed? A broken promise echoed through the marketplace, not with a shout, but with a chilling, eloquent silence. For every signal of trust, there existed an equally powerful signal of its betrayal, a shadow system designed to police the entire economy. The most brutal of these signals were the public punishments, stark performances of justice meant to deter any would-be cheat. A baker who sold underweight bread might find himself dragged through the muddy streets, the very loaf he had cheated with tied around his neck like a grotesque necklace. In the main square, a merchant who defaulted on a debt could have his name, or even a symbolic representation of his broken tally stick, nailed to the pillory for all to see. This was not just a penalty, it was a living, breathing advertisement of disgrace, a silent scream that his word was no longer good. The message was instant and universally understood, a visual scar on a man's reputation that could take a lifetime to heal. Even the church played a role in this enforcement. In Scotland, the stool of repentance placed before the entire congregation was not only for moral sins, but for fraudulent trade, forcing a merchant to face the spiritual and social consequences of his deceit. Yet for many, the most terrifying sanctions were not these dramatic spectacles, but the quiet, daily ones. A merchant who had broken faith might arrive at the Guildhall to find his usual greeting replaced by averted eyes. The friendly handshake offered to seal a deal would be deliberately withheld, a silent, crushing rejection. In the tavern, his colleagues might suddenly fall silent when he approached their table. This social ostracism was a commercial death sentence. In a world built on credit and connection, to be made invisible was to be bankrupt. A cold shoulder in the marketplace was more effective than any fine, because it dissolved the very network of trust that allowed business to function. This self-policing mechanism, where the community itself enforced the rules through a language of inclusion and exclusion, maintained the integrity of the entire silent code. But what gave these social signals their ultimate weight, making a handshake feel sacred and an oath unbreakable? The answer lies in the deepest symbols that governed the medieval mind. The shadow of the cathedral spire truly did fall across every marketplace deal. In an age where faith permeated every aspect of life, the most powerful silent signal was an appeal to a higher authority. A promise made before God was considered unbreakable, and merchants developed a sophisticated visual language to invoke this divine witness. Before finalizing a major agreement, the parties might deliberately move their negotiation to the steps of the local church or the quiet courtyard of a mosque. The very act of conducting business on holy ground was a silent but thunderous declaration that this deal was under sacred supervision. The presence of a priest or an imam, even if he remained a silent observer, transformed a commercial bargain into a moral covenant. His mere presence was a signal that the parties were binding their souls, not just their purses. The objects used in these oath rituals carried immense weight. A merchant might place his hand upon a beautifully illuminated Bible or a leather-bound Quran. This gesture needed no translation. It communicated instantly that the speaker's word was backed by the full force of his religious beliefs and the threat of eternal consequences for deceit. In some transactions, the stakes were even higher. A trader might swear an oath upon a religious relic, perhaps a fragment of bone from a saint encased in a jeweled reliquary. To break an oath sworn on such a holy object was seen as an invitation for divine wrath, risking not just financial ruin but the damnation of one's soul. This fear of supernatural judgment was a far more effective deterrent than any earthly law for many medieval people. Even a merchant's personal adornments could serve as silent signals of trustworthiness rooted in faith. A pilgrim who had journeyed to a distant shrine like Santiago de Compostela would wear a distinctive scallop shell badge on his hat or cloak. This badge was more than a souvenir. It was a public resume of piety, endurance, and wide travel. It silently told potential partners that this was a man of dedication and experience, one who had connections across continents and whose word was likely as solid as his faith. These symbols created a world where commerce and conscience were inextricably linked, where a handshake in a churchyard felt more binding than a written contract in a secular court. Yet, for all their spiritual power, these rituals needed to be grounded in the physical reality of the goods being traded. This required another set of silent signals, born not from faith, but from the highly specialized knowledge of the craftsman's hands. A master's tools were a silent resume of his skill. In the dim light of a goldsmith's workshop, the instruments themselves spoke volumes before a single word was exchanged. The tiny, impossibly precise scales, their brass pans polished to a mirror shine, were not merely for weighing. They were a bold declaration that the craftsman handled materials of such immense value that even a speck of dust could affect the price. His collection of delicate hammers and fine-tipped gravers signaled a patient, meticulous art, one that demanded and deserved the absolute trust of his wealthy clients. To see these tools laid out on a velvet cloth was to understand that you were in the presence of a master, not a mere laborer. This principle extended far beyond the jeweler's bench. On the deck of a merchant ship, the captain's most important possession was not the cargo, but a small, intricate device, perhaps an astrolabe or a cross staff. This complex instrument of polished wood and brass was a powerful signal to any merchant consigning goods. It silently proclaimed the captain's ability to navigate by the stars, to traverse trackless oceans, and to deliver valuable cargo safely to a distant port. A captain who owned and knew how to use such a tool was instantly a more reliable partner. Even for a merchant who might not be literate, the physical ledger book he carried held meaning. A thick, well-bound volume, its pages filled with neat columns of figures penned by a hired scribe, was a signal of an orderly, well-managed business. It suggested a man who understood his accounts, who knew his profits and losses, and who could therefore be trusted with credit. But perhaps the most potent tool of all was the seal press. This small, handheld device, often carved from brass or ivory, was the medieval equivalent of a notary's stamp and a corporate logo combined. When pressed into warm wax, it left an intricate, unique design, a heraldic beast or a complex monogram. This seal was a silent claim to identity and authority, a promise that the document it closed was genuine and binding. The quality of the press's craftsmanship was a direct reflection of the owner's status. A finely detailed seal inspired confidence, a crude one, suspicion. In a world of face-to-face dealings, these objects were the non-verbal equivalent of a professional certification. They answered the critical question before it could even be asked. How do I know you are competent? The tools provided the answer. This concentration of specialized skills and the trusted tools that represented them did not happen by chance. It flowed to specific places, to cities whose very names became synonymous with quality and expertise. A city's name could be the most powerful silent signal of all. A merchant from Cairo, hearing that a shipment of spices had arrived on a Venetian galley, already knew a great deal about the quality of the goods and the reliability of the deal before he ever reached the docks. The reputation of certain trading hubs became a blanket guarantee, amplifying and validating every silent signal that originated within their walls. No cities did this more powerfully than Constantinople and Venice. The sheer scale of Constantinople was its first and loudest statement. Approaching by sea, a merchant would first see the colossal Theodosian walls, a seemingly impregnable ribbon of stone and mortar that stretched for miles. Those walls were not just defenses, they were a monumental advertisement of stability and immense wealth, a silent promise that commerce here was protected by an empire that had endured for 1,000 years. Within the city, the Golden Horn Harbor was a forest of masts from every known nation. Here, the silent signals of the world collided and merged. A Byzantine official used one set of gestures to inspect goods, while an Arab merchant used another to negotiate a price with a Slavic fur trader, all under the watchful eye of Italian bankers. Constantinople acted as a grand amplifier, taking the diverse commercial languages of Europe and Asia and blending them into a new, hybrid dialect of trust that was then carried back to ports across the known world. Venice, in contrast, did not rely on massive walls but on meticulous regulation. The entire city was a machine for trade, its canals acting as organized highways that channeled commerce directly to the central markets of the Rialto. The Venetian government did not leave trust to chance, it engineered it. Its most brilliant invention was the Venetian ducat, a coin of such consistent purity and weight that its value was trusted from the markets of London to the souks of Alexandria. The ducat itself became a silent signal, a tiny, portable piece of Venice that carried the city's reputation for integrity in every transaction. A merchant paying with ducats did not need to haggle over the value of the currency. The coin's very appearance ended the debate. This obsessive standardization extended to everything. The Venetian state certified weights and measures, regulated the quality of goods, and maintained a strict legal framework for resolving disputes. A commercial practice that was accepted and codified in Venice quickly became the gold standard for merchants across the Mediterranean. To do business the Venetian way was to signal that you were modern, reliable, and connected to the most sophisticated commercial network on Earth. These hub cities acted as clearinghouses, not just for silks and spices, but for the very customs of commerce. They refined vague gestures into precise rituals, and they turned personal reputations into a collective asset. A merchant operating from Venice or Constantinople carried the city's authority with him like an invisible passport, his own credibility instantly bolstered by his address. From these powerful nodes, the refined signals of trust pulsed outward along the veins of commerce, the well-worn trade routes that stretched across land and sea. But how did these complex, city-born signals survive the long, lonely journey to their destination? The answer lies in the human networks that carried them, the families and communities whose bonds were stronger than any storm or bandit attack. The road itself was a messenger, its surface worn smooth by countless feet and hooves. For a merchant caravan threading its way through a narrow alpine pass or a lone pilgrim crossing the arid plains of Spain, the landscape was not a blank space but a text to be read. Every feature held meaning, a silent signal maintained not by any single king or council, but by the collective effort of every traveler who had come before. A pile of stones, a cairn carefully stacked by the side of a path, was more than just a marker. It was a vote of confidence from a stranger, a message left for those who would follow, saying, "This is the way I made it through." In dense forests, a blaze cut into the bark of a tree served the same purpose, a scar that guided generations. These were not official signposts, they were a grassroots network of safety, a silent collaboration for mutual survival. The most reliable of these pathways were the great pilgrimage routes. The road to Santiago de Compostela in Spain was one of the world's first information superhighways. A merchant traveling this route knew he was on a well-trodden path, lined with monasteries that offered shelter, bridges built by pious kings, and towns accustomed to strangers. The constant flow of pilgrims meant safety in numbers and a ready-made infrastructure of hostels and markets. A busy path, its dirt packed hard and clear of debris, was the most reassuring signal of all. It whispered that many had passed this way recently, that bandits were unlikely, and that the way ahead was known. Conversely, an overgrown trail, its entrance choked with weeds, screamed a warning of disuse and danger. This environmental literacy was a critical skill. Experienced travelers did not just follow a map, they read the story written on the land. A distinctive, oddly shaped mountain peak mentioned in an oral itinerary became a crucial signpost, confirming they were days away from a certain trading post. The crumbling ruins of an old watchtower might signal they were nearing a territorial border. The route was a living narrative, and these landmarks were its chapters and verses, memorized and passed from seasoned merchant to eager apprentice around campfires. This knowledge was a form of currency, as valuable as the goods carried on the camels' backs. But even the most well-marked path could not guarantee what awaited a traveler at the journey's end. How did a merchant, arriving in a strange city after months of travel, know who to trust? The silent signals had to travel ahead of him, carried not on the wind, but on the most delicate and powerful medium of all, the human voice. The sky was a merchant's first and most vital ledger. Long before consulting a written almanac, a trader standing on a Genoan dock would look west, reading the dawn's colors like a financial forecast. A red sky in the morning was a silent, urgent signal to delay a ship's departure, a centuries-old rhyme warning of approaching storms that could sink a fortune in spices. This was not superstition, it was hard-won empirical knowledge, a language of the elements that every successful merchant had to master. Their entire enterprise depended on a deep, intuitive reading of the natural world. The migratory flight of cranes southward in autumn was a more reliable calendar than any parchment, signaling that the time had come to move goods before winter closed the mountain passes. A merchant planning a caravan journey across the Alps would send scouts not just to check for bandits, but to assess the condition of the high pasturelands. Lush green grass meant his horses and oxen could be fed for free along the way, a critical saving. Brown, overgrazed land, however, was a silent bill for expensive fodder that had to be carried, cutting deeply into his profit margins. Even the phase of the moon dictated the rhythm of travel. A full moon was not just a beautiful sight, it was a practical tool, illuminating roads just enough for a cautious night journey, allowing a caravan to avoid the scorching heat of a desert day or make up for lost time on a well-trod path. This environmental literacy turned the world itself into a partner in commerce. The chirping of crickets, the direction of the wind, the formation of clouds, all were data points in a continuous risk assessment. A captain hearing the cries of seabirds knew he was nearing land, but the specific species and their behavior could tell him if that land was a safe harbor or a treacherous lee shore. This knowledge was so valuable that it became a form of intellectual property, passed from experienced mariner to young apprentice during long nights at sea. It was a silent, unspoken curriculum that separated the prosperous merchant from the bankrupt. And just as this natural wisdom was gathered through observation, it was eventually codified into another powerful, portable object, a silent guide you could hold in your hand. A detailed Portolan chart spread across a table in a ship's cabin was a whispered conversation with 1,000 previous voyages. Its parchment surface was not a true map of the world as we know it, but a dense, practical guide to the edge of the known world, the coastline. While these charts often bore place names in Latin or Italian, their true language was visual, a lexicon of symbols instantly understood by any experienced mariner from Barcelona to Constantinople. A tiny drawing of a castle signaled a fortified city of commercial importance. A cross marked a cathedral town, promising a safe harbor and a community that honored the laws of sanctuary. Most critically, clusters of tiny dots or careful stippling indicated treacherous shoals and submerged rocks, hazards that could tear the hull from a merchant galley and send its fortune to the bottom of the sea. These symbols were the collective memory of generations of sailors, a silent scream of warning or a beacon of opportunity etched in ink. The most striking feature of these maps was the web of lines radiating from multiple compass roses scattered across the parchment. These were room lines, a spiderweb of constant bearings. A ship's captain did not use the chart to see his destination, he used it to plot his course. By aligning a ruler along a room line connecting his starting port to his goal, he could determine the precise compass direction to hold, day after day, to reach his target. The accuracy of these lines was the chart's greatest value, a silent mathematical contract between the cartographer and the sailor. It transformed the open, terrifying emptiness of the sea into a predictable, if perilous, highway. Owning such a chart was a profound statement. It was an expensive, handcrafted object, often a closely guarded secret. For a merchant to invest in one signaled that he was no coastal trader, but a serious player in the high-stakes game of long-distance commerce. He was buying access to the silent, accumulated wisdom of every shipmaster who had contributed a depth sounding or a coastal profile to the cartographer's workshop. This knowledge was not just lines on parchment, it was a living tradition, passed from pilot to apprentice on the rolling deck of a ship, a continuous stream of unspoken expertise that guided commerce safely home. This silent knowledge was a living inheritance passed down not through books but through a lifetime of shared observation. A master merchant did not lecture his apprentice with abstract rules. Instead, the learning happened in the bustling marketplace itself, a continuous, unscripted lesson in reading the world. A master might pause as a new caravan entered the city gates, his eyes narrowing as he observed the condition of the horses and the way the lead merchant carried himself. He would then murmur to the young man at his side, pointing out how the dust on the wagon suggested a hurried journey from the south, or how the confident set of the caravan master's shoulders signaled a successful and well-protected trip. The apprentice learned to decode these subtle signals through 1,000 such moments, his education written in the dust of the road and the expressions on 1,000 faces. He memorized the merchant marks not from a chart, but by seeing them stamped on crates in the warehouse, his master explaining that the mark of the 3 towers belonged to a Florentine family known for their honest measure, while the coiled serpent was best avoided, as their silks often arrived moth-eaten. The stories shared over a late-night meal were as important as any ledger. The master would recount the tale of a Venetian trader who had once defaulted on a debt, and how, years later, the man's son found every door in the Rialto market closed to him, his family's reputation a ghost that haunted his every step. These narratives were not just entertainment, they were the case law of commerce, teaching the apprentice that a broken promise had consequences that echoed for generations. The most critical lessons were often the most silent. The master would demonstrate the precise pressure of a handshake that conveyed firm commitment, or the slight tilt of the head that indicated a final offer in a negotiation. The apprentice learned that trust was built not in grand declarations, but in these minute, almost invisible gestures. This slow, immersive process was a filter. It ensured that the complex language of signals remained within the community, its nuances protected from outsiders who might misuse or devalue them. The apprenticeship was a vow of silence in itself, a promise to safeguard the secrets that made large-scale trade possible. It created a web of shared understanding that stretched across continents and centuries, each new generation adding its own hard-won wisdom to the collective memory. The final and most honest signal in any deal was the goods themselves. A bale of wool sitting on a Genos dock was a dense text waiting to be read by a knowing eye. An experienced merchant did not need a bill of lading or a merchant's mark to begin his assessment. He would first run his fingers through the fleece, feeling for the telltale greasiness of the lanolin. A high-quality wool from England's Cotswolds would feel rich and oily, promising a strong, durable yarn, while a drier, coarser feel might indicate an inferior breed or a poorly managed flock. He would then bring a handful close to his face, inhaling deeply. The scent was a map of its origin, carrying traces of the pastorillons, free from the sour smell of mildew that would betray a damp, disastrous sea voyage. The color, from the pale cream of the finest grades to the darker, yellower hues of lesser quality, completed the story. This sensory analysis happened in moments, a silent dialogue between the merchant and the material. The packaging provided its own chapter. The way a sack of grain was stitched shut with tight, even stitches spoke of a careful packer who took pride in his work. A specific type of knot used to tie a bundle of furs could silently identify the trappers' community in the far north, a detail that added to the provenance and value. A crack in a ceramic amphora, no matter how small, was a red flag waving furiously. It whispered of a rough journey, of potential contamination, of wine turned to vinegar or olive oil spoiled by exposure to air. The product itself never lied. A merchant could be charmed by a smooth negotiator and impressed by a gilt seal, but the cold, hard reality was in the weight of the spice, the sheen of the silk, the sound a piece of timber made when tapped. This direct sensory evaluation was the ultimate check against fraud. It was a universal language that required no translation, only experience. A dishonest merchant might try to mix pebbles into a sack of pepper to add weight, but the rattle when shaken would give him away. He might dye inferior cloth to mimic a more expensive color, but the feel of the fabric and the way the color held under a thumb's pressure would reveal the deceit. The commodity was its own authentication system, and learning to read it was the most fundamental skill of all. This honest communication by the goods was the final, unanswerable test of every deal, the moment where all the silent promises met their tangible truth. Yet this intricate web of silent agreements had its fragile points, snapping under the strain of a misunderstood gesture. The very strength of these signals, their deep cultural roots, became a weakness when two different systems collided. A Genos merchant might seal a deal with a firm handshake and a spit into his palm, believing the matter settled in the eyes of God and man. To his Arab trading partner, however, this physical ritual might seem strange, even distasteful. For him, a verbal promise spoken aloud with the phrase "Inshallah, if God wills it," carried the true weight of commitment, acknowledging that all outcomes were ultimately in divine hands. The European merchant, hearing this conditional phrase, might misinterpret it as hesitation or a lack of serious intent, a seed of distrust planted before the goods had even left the warehouse. The concept of time itself was a silent language that often translated poorly. A German merchant from a regimented Hanseatic town expected a shipment to arrive on the specific day agreed upon, his business plans built around that precise schedule. When his Egyptian counterpart, operating on a more fluid understanding of time influenced by seasons and caravan routes, arrived a week later, the German perceived it not as a logistical delay but as a profound breach of faith. He saw laziness or deception where there was only a different cultural rhythm. These were not simple errors, they were fundamental clashes in how the world was ordered. The system of trust that worked so seamlessly within the confines of a Venetian guild or a Cairo trading quarter could fracture at the frontiers of contact, in the bustling, chaotic ports where strangers met for the first and perhaps only time. A merchant's mark that guaranteed quality in London meant nothing to a trader from Samarkand who had never seen it before. The official weight stamped with the seal of a French king held no authority for a merchant whose loyalty was to a distant caliph. In these spaces, the silent signals could become dangerously ambiguous, but from this friction came a necessary innovation. Merchants who operated regularly in these border zones, the intermediaries who bridged Christendom and the Islamic world, began to develop a new hybrid language. They learned which of their own gestures caused confusion and which were universally understood. They adopted simpler, more graphic symbols that could cross cultural divides. The need to overcome these misunderstandings forced the system to evolve, creating a pidgin language of commerce built from the most resilient and clear signals from each tradition. The conflicts did not destroy the silent code, they refined it, proving that trust, even when unspoken, was never static but a living, adapting thing. The echoes of that medieval marketplace are not lost in time. They are all around us in the stores we enter and the deals we make every day. The modern corporate handshake, captured in 1,000 press photographs, carries the same weight as a solemn pledge sealed on the steps of a cathedral. It is a ritual that says, "My word is my bond," a direct inheritance from those tactile negotiations beneath the counting house table. The complex language of reputation has simply been digitized. Your credit score is the modern equivalent of the whispers that traveled between Bruges and Venice, a numerical summary of your financial trustworthiness calculated not in taverns but by vast algorithms. It serves the same exact purpose, to allow strangers to decide in an instant whether you are a safe risk, whether your silent promise of future payment can be believed. Walk down any supermarket aisle and you are navigating a landscape designed with the same principles as the champagne fairs. The predictable organization, with all the dairy products in one chilled section and the breakfast cereals in another, is a modernized version of the medieval market's deliberate layout. It guides you efficiently, using visual cues instead of the scent of the fishmonger or the sound of the blacksmith's hammer. And on every box, every can, every product, you see the descendants of the merchant's mark. The corporate logo is today's painted bird or three-towered castle. The Apple, the Nike swoosh, the McDonald's golden arches. These symbols communicate a world of information about quality, price, and brand identity without a single word. We have been trained to read them as fluently as a medieval trader reading the marks on a bale of wool. Look closer at that product and you will find the direct heir to the guild seal. The UL mark on an electrical appliance, the ISO certification on a piece of machinery, the organic stamp on a carton of milk, these are not mere decorations. They are silent screams of legitimacy, backed not by a local guild but by an international standards organization. They tell us that an independent authority has verified the product's safety or quality, allowing us to trust an item made by strangers on the other side of the world. Even the humble barcode is a silent signal, a machine-readable tally stick that instantly communicates price, origin, and inventory status. The medieval system was not replaced, it was scaled up, its core principles encoded into the global supply chain. The silent signals that once governed trade between a handful of merchants on a dusty wharf now underpin our entire global economy, proving that the human need for quick, reliable, non-verbal communication in commerce is truly timeless. These silent signal systems of medieval trade were a masterpiece of human ingenuity. They show us that communication is far more than just words on a page or sounds in the air. Trust, the essential ingredient for any economy, can be built and maintained through a rich tapestry of gestures, objects, and shared understandings. This intricate web of unspoken agreements connected continents, allowing spices from the Moluccas to reach tables in London and English wool to be woven into cloth in Florence. It was this very network of trust that fostered the cultural exchanges and economic interdependence which ultimately shaped the modern world. The efficiency and security we often take for granted in commerce have always relied on a foundation of shared, silent signals. So the next time you see a corporate logo you instantly recognize, or when you seal a deal with a handshake, remember the long and fascinating history of silent agreements that made such moments possible. This entire system stands as a powerful reminder of our deep-seated human capacity to build complex systems of cooperation, even across the widest divides. If you found this journey into the hidden language of history fascinating, please like this video and subscribe for more deep dives into the past, and we would love to hear from you in the comments. What modern silent signals do you see at work in today's business world?